And we're back with day 2 of my Pan American Intercollegiate series review. This is coming out a bit late because I got sick, so my video recording got a bit delayed, but I'm going to try to put out the second 2 days so I can move on to the next tournament series review that I have planned. But anyway, in the last episode, as you saw, I got off to a really rough start, 0-2 on the first day. But this is now day 2, and actually round 4. I didn't play in the third round because I voluntarily kind of switched out of our team's rotation. But here is the new day. I'm back with a fresh mind and trying to get my first win. And we're actually up against the St. Louis C team in this round. And I have the white pieces against an 1800 rated player, so I should be the favorite. But here we go. Play e4, and he responds with the Sicilian, the classical variation, and I go for bishop g5, the Richter Rouser. Pretty common line in the Sicilian. Played it quite a few times, so I should be pretty comfortable. And after long castles, he now decides to go for kind of an odd move. The typical moves for black here are stuff like a6 or castles, but here he played queen a5, which kind of threw me off because I knew this wasn't such a good move, but I wasn't sure how to actually punish it. And I ended up playing knight b3, which is not quite the best move. What I could have done was actually taken this knight. And after pawn takes, I should mention that if bishop takes, I can then take here and then take here on d6. And his kind of central structure is already busted. If he takes here, I actually have this in-between move check, and I'm winning the rook. So he would have had to take with actually the pawn. And now I can go back and then play knight b5, and this pawn is falling, and he can't really castle because his king is going to be exposed. But somehow I overlooked this sequence, and instead I played knight b3 first, forcing his queen to go back. Now I took, but the difference is now he gets to castle, and even though I win this pawn, it's actually not that big of a deal. Black is still relatively okay because he has the two bishops, and he has some open lines. And he plays queen b6. I went back with knight c4. He played queen c7. And now I saw that he was going to play rook d8, attacking my queen. So I said, okay, how about I'm up a pawn, let's trade queens. And this was the right thing to do. And I was just expecting that maybe he would take because he can't really move his queen anywhere. But instead he hit me with this bishop g5 check. And I said, well, okay, that's cute. I mean, maybe he wants me to blunder with f4 because then he'll take, right? And then my queen is actually lost because of this x-ray. But I said, okay, let me just play king b1, right? Get out of the check, and then I'll be fine. Except now he played the move rook d8. And at this moment, it occurred to me that I was in big trouble. And I had actually just made a huge blunder. Because even though it looks like I can take his queen, by me moving my king to b1, the last move, I now hung my rook, and I was now vulnerable to a back rank, and this is actually now checkmate. Which meant that I had to now give up my queen for a rook. But if we go back and ask ourselves, how did I get into this whole mess? I mean, queen d6 was a good move. King b1 was a seemingly natural move, but actually king b1 was the big mistake here. And what I should have played here is knight to e3, keeping my king close to the rook. And now this move obviously doesn't work because I'll simply take his queen. In this case, we probably would have traded. And then if he took, okay, he can give me doubled pawns, but I'm still ahead of pawn and in a pretty pleasant early endgame. But I played the natural-looking king b1 and basically lost on the spot here. I mean, it's not automatically game over because it's a rook for a queen, and I kept fighting, but realistically, against even a decent player, there wasn't much chance, and he very correctly forced some trade of pieces, and eventually the huge material advantage made the difference as his queen is just too powerful, and he started pushing the pass pawn, and in this position I resigned because my pawn is not going to make it far with his queen defending, and on the other hand, there's not really any good way for me to stop his pawn. So that was a pretty tough loss there. I mean, to lose because of one seemingly natural move is pretty brutal, but it's just a reminder that in a game of chess, any move could be your downfall, and you got to double check at all times, even if you think you're safe. You're never truly safe against someone that has a tactical sense. They can really hurt you, and I learned that the hard way. But now we go on to round 5. So despite my loss in round 4, we were able to beat the St. Louis C team and move on to face another tough opponent in the competition, the UT Dallas D team. The UT Dallas's A through C teams all have a USCF average of about 2,500. This team, on the other hand, only had an average of about 2,200 only. And playing in the second board, I was up against a national master who I had actually played in the Collegiate Blitz Championship back in September and miraculously drew against. I mean, I was dead lost, and in a time scramble, somehow I survived and even almost won, but I kind of evened out. But I knew it was going to be a tough game, but I also did some preparation, and I knew that he played D4, and I knew that we might head into a territory that might kind of favor me because I've been working on this opening a bit lately, and it poses some problems to a lot of D4 players. It's known as the English rat, and in this variation, it allows black to gain a lot of space in the center by pushing this pawn and supporting it, and white has to be very quick with counterplay on the queen side, which my experienced opponent obviously knew that and went for an early rook b1, and then after we castled, he played b4. And now his goal is going to be basically to push these pawns and try to crack my queen side. And my goal is going to be to try to counter that and maybe go for some kingside attacks, sort of in the style of the King's Indian. But throughout this game, I made some inaccuracies because I wasn't really totally familiar with the setup, and a lot of these positions are kind of tricky. And up to this point, I was doing okay. But this was where I started to go sort of wrong. I played bishop a6 here, sort of attacking his knight on b5, which is in a good position, but really I could have just played something like queen e7 and just developed. I was a little bit worried that he would play something like this, but then I could have just retreated, and if he pushed the pawn, I would be fine. But sometimes when you're in the game, you don't realize these things, and I kind of went out of my way to take this knight, and then at this point, I had to blockade this pawn. And here I made another sort of mistake. He was attacking my knight, right? His goal is to get a trade, after which he'll be able to give a check and then try to push this pawn. So I knew I had to defend this knight. But I went about it incorrectly. I decided to go queen e6 here. And after the trade, the problem is now my queen is blockading the pawn, but the queen is not a good blockader. The queen wants to be active. So what I really should have done was play the move knight to d7 here and defend it actually with a knight, because now if there's a trade, now the knight guards the checking square from the bishop, and the queen is a little bit more free. But again, this is a rapid game, and when you don't have a lot of time, sometimes you just make sort of the first move that comes to mind, and it's not always the best one. But even still, I was doing okay up to this point. He was starting to put some pressure, but I was defending, traded the knights, and then at some point I started to get low on time, and he started to break through on the A file, and here we traded. I went back, and I already had 2 minutes left at this point, and here he played bishop b5, trying to sort of get in. I was sort of on the back foot. I mean, his pawn is already very close. He gave a check, and now I realize that I'm losing this pawn here because my king is hit and my pawn is falling. And actually in this position I played the move bishop a7, which was a big mistake, but neither of us realized it. He actually missed that he could have infiltrated like this with queen e7. And now because of my king's very odd position, I'd be borderline lost here, but he didn't realize it. He took, and now played rook c6. And now, even though I'm down a pawn here and he has a pass pawn, I potentially could have still held this, but I had very low time. What I should have played here is just bishop back. And if he attacks me, then I can just go back, and he can't really dislodge me because if he ever goes here, I'll just go here and I'm going to take the pawn. So he would have had to been a little bit more patient and maybe like brought his king in, maybe tried to maneuver his bishop around, but it's still sort of in the realms of being holdable. But instead, I made a big mistake and played the move rook b8, which should have lost the game on the spot because if you might realize, white can actually play the move rook takes. And now after rook takes, white can simply push, and I actually can't get behind the pawn to stop it because, of course, the bishop defends the square, and he will have a queen for my rook, and rook is not going to stand much of a chance against the queen here. So that would have been completely winning, but he was also low on time, so he missed it, played here. I just decided to do something with my king. I'm kind of stuck, and he maneuvered his bishop, and this is my last mistake, rook b6. He simply pushed the pawn, and I resigned. So this was kind of an unfortunate victory. I mean, I got off to a relatively good start, but he was just a little bit more experienced than me, made a bit better moves throughout. Also, the fact that it was a rapid time control made it hard for me to really play those accurate moves to keep the game alive, and eventually I lost, meaning I got the tournament off to an 0-4 start through the first 5 rounds that the team played. And this round we actually got beat pretty bad, 3.5 to half by the UTDD team. I mean, we were outrated by an average of 200 points, so not much of a surprise there. But let's see if I can bounce back in the last round of the day. So in the 6th round, the last of day 2, we were paired against the Georgia Tech B team, who we were favored against. But I had black for the 4th time out of 5 games. And that was a little bit annoying, but what can you do? My opponent opened with e4, and I went for the same opening that I played in the opening game. Only this time I'm not facing a grandmaster. I'm just facing a normal 1800 player who, unlike the GM, did not know the best setup against my opening and played bishop e3, which is already a bit of a mistake here because it allows me to now play b5, after which I'm now doing perfectly great here with black. I mean, typically white wants to play a4 to stop this, but he didn't know, and now I already have a great position. I just simply castle. He does the same. And I play queen c7 just to further defend my center. And I'm already looking to make some moves kind of to fight back against his space advantage. And here he played rook e1. And here I had a couple ways to go about the position. But the way I decided was kind of the most aggressive, to play b4 here, kicking the knight back. And after he moved back, I now played d5. Sort of striking in the center, and now there could be a lot of potential trades. I mean, one trade would be if you were to take here, after which I would then take here, right? And then if bishop takes, I can take, and then I'm going to win this pawn. If he takes this way, then actually that's even worse because this allows me to fork his knight and bishop. So there's a lot of kind of dynamicism in the center, a lot of different potential trades. He made probably the right decision to not really commit to any capture and just to further defend his pawn. But now I took, and played f5, forcing his bishop back, and now e4, which at first looked like it's winning a piece, and to be honest, I thought that it was winning a piece because I didn't realize that he had now a check. And then he's able to save his piece. He actually decided to go to g5 with the bishop. He could have done so with the knight as well, which would have been a little bit better. He moved here with the bishop. And now I had a choice. I mean, if I take, then his knight takes, and then his knight is going to be threatening some annoying stuff around my king. I can't really take this way, though, because then he'll take here, and he's attacking my rook. What I should have actually done, and this is a move that I considered, is the move bishop d6. But it looked a little scary because I saw that he would play knight h4, and then he's threatening to bring his queen here, and maybe even some checkmate ideas. But it turns out if I would just follow that up with knight f6, I would have just been completely fine and much better here. Now I have the space advantage with these pawns kind of clamping down on his position. But I didn't do that. I actually played knight to b6, attacking his bishop. He took, and now moved the bishop back. And now I play the move a5, looking to kind of trap his bishop, which has already been kind of pushed to his back against the wall. And in this position, he played the move knight e5. And I realized here that I have to be super careful. If I simply try to go for his bishop with a4, well, then that allows queen h5. And for obvious reasons, I can't take this guy now, because then he would have this check, and he's actually winning my queen due to this pin. So I had to make a precautionary move and play queen f6 just to protect the square. And now I offer to trade the bishops. And this position is about equal, maybe a little bit better for me because, again, I have a bit more space. Here he played the move a3, though, which is not so great because now I was able to force a trade of knights. And after he took, I took, and suddenly he realized that both his pawns are hit. And likely he's losing one of them. But this would have been fine for him if he had just played something like b3 and just allowed me to take here and then maybe attack my queen and then come back on defense. Even though he's down a pawn, it's not that easy to convert. There's still a lot of pieces on the board. Like, I'm slightly better, but there's still a lot of work to do. Instead, though, he thought in this position for a minute or two and played the move rook a2. Which idea is probably to go and double on the a file to attack this pawn, only there's a small problem. He disconnected his rooks and just totally blundered. And I was able to take the rook, and just like that, he resigned. I won the game. And it felt pretty good to finally be on the receiving side of the blunder, as opposed to being the one who blunders the game away, as was in the previous rounds. But you know, this happens in a rapid game. This has happened to me before, where I blundered a rook like this, where I don't even realize that it's like under attack, and I move my other rook. So I could understand his mistake, but regardless, this is a pretty good result to me for finally get a win after 4 consecutive losses. One of the worst starts that I could ever recall to a tournament. And we were actually able to win this game, win the match, I should say, and finish the first 2 days, the first 6 rounds, with a score of 3 out of 6. See you in day 3.